Thank you, Sijo, for joining us today. Sijo is the founding CEO of Startup Village, and he's also a consultant with the Kerala Startup Mission. Welcome again, Sijo.
Thank you, Asha. Thanks for joining me here.
Sijo, let's start with your first entrepreneurial stint. Could you please tell us about it?
So my first entrepreneurial stint happened soon after my engineering. So essentially what happened was a bunch of friends were trying out several things while in college itself, and one thing led to the other. It so happened that we had a small business going which started raking in some revenue. But essentially the turning point happened when we heard about this initiative called an incubator in Technopark, which happened to be very close to where our college is. So it was a series of accident information that got to us, that got us to think that maybe we can even try out a company in the first place. And ever since then, it's been a series of what you call hits and misses, trying out various stuff. And one of the factors that worked to our advantage was that it was around in our year that the placements has started really skyrocketing. So all of a sudden there was a sense of security that you're going to get a job and everything, and we thought we'll try it out and see where it takes us. The first stint happened to be this initiative called Torque, which started as a small initiative, but 1 year down the line we learned about various ways of building a business. We realized that we should probably raise capital, build a technology company and everything. So in 2006 December that we eventually set up an entity called MobMe, which stood for Mobile Media and Entertainment. We essentially targeted the mobile value-added service industry, and that was my first entrepreneurial stint, so to speak.
Back then, was the government really futuristic enough to see possibility for a technology business incubation center? And what was your experience in Tibet as such?
Okay, so from a government perspective, we never really knew that there was this huge thing called government. We always walked up to people and started talking to people. And one of the things that really gave us a high initially when we went about doing our own startup was talking to thought leaders. So we somehow found it extremely exhilarating to try and bypass the middle management and start talking to the CEOs and CXOs and everything, and get a sense of ideas and discuss possibilities and stuff like that. So essentially when we started engaging with government also, we never really thought that we were engaging with government per se. So we started engaging some IAS officers, started speaking to them. And over a period of time, it's these interactions and the feedback from them that really helped us understand how to work with government also. So that's one part of the story. Now, second part of it, was government futuristic enough and everything? We'll have to talk about who are the people who help out for this various point of time. But Technopark TBI was essentially a government-run incubator, and in the country, probably the first incubator to run out of a private sector park. Until that point of time, all government-supported incubators were housed within an education institution. Now, the private participation becomes extremely key for any incubation initiative to function well. So the fact that this was housed inside Technopark automatically gave it a lot of advantages which other incubators probably did not possess. Just the tag that we are based out of Technopark really helped us open a lot of doors. So these are some small initiatives. Now talking about our experience with government, so as I said, we started talking to a lot of people as well. So Startup Village happened at a later point when government also decided to help and back us. Now the seed was planted around, let's say, 4-5 years before Startup Village officially started in 2012. It's somewhere around 2007 that we had drafted a small note and gave to the government. And the concept was extremely simple and straightforward, because when we started out, we had this notion of having this perfect idea. We had this notion of having this, big business plan and stuff like that. And our initial ideas were also very primitive. But during our first 2 to 3 years of being in the industry, we learned a lot of things about how industry actually operated. And the moment we had access to technology, so to put it in perspective, we got server access in Vodafone and BPL with operators. That took us about 2 years. The moment we got that particular access, we realized there are tons of ideas that could be built around that access. So the kind of ideas that we have is only dependent on the kind of exposure that you have, and access to technology plays a very key role. The initial concept, in a nutshell, for Startup Village was, we called it Innovation Hub. We had this idea of a building where youngsters, kids, students and everyone will have access to technology and will be allowed to play around with technology. That was the initial concept. It went through various iterations, as I said, the feedbacks and everything, until it struck a chord with Dr. H.K. Mittal, who was heading DST at that point of time. He was mulling a way to scale the incubation infrastructure in the country, and he was of the opinion that private sector participation is the only way to go forward with it. So sometime in 2011, that the conversation started getting into a particular point where Government of India particular minister said that he can probably look at supporting under one of the government in India schemes. That was in 2009. It's in 2011 that the scheme got approved, the proposal got approved. It took about 2 years. And that's how this has happened. And all along, we have seen that government, at least the people that we've worked with in government, have been very progressive in terms of wanting to grow the system, trying out various stuff, very accessible, and helping us give feedback all along. I've often repeated this to various people when sometimes you get the feedback that it's difficult to work with government. I've worked with government when I was in PwC, also in consulting. Predominantly, my way of looking at it is, government is not really difficult, it's different. Fundamentally, private sector has a way of execution operation and the way you take decisions. It's inherently slightly different when it's a government sector involvement. So partly, it's also our sensitization to understand how do you work the system as well. And fortunately for us, we were involved with these concerned people all along. And some of these people inherently mentored us all along the way to understand and figure it out. So that's been our story, and it still is a story going forward.
Could you please tell us how your MBA has helped you take SV?
Sure. So in terms of the MBA experience, I think I'll have to really point out to this one particular professor and one particular course that I attended. The professor's name was Professor Venkat. He did his, he was teaching organizational behavior, and his field of research and interest was transformational leadership. And from that perspective, we had 2 papers of his. The first paper was called IIO, which is Intelligently Interacting with Others. And the second paper was titled LIP, Leadership, Influence and Power. And from my perspective, these 2 papers and the subject matter it covered was very profound in terms of helping me understand the world a lot more differently. Now, until that point of time, all of us being achievers and doers and everything, we had this notion that we had to really do it ourselves. And suddenly he puts in perspective that at the end of the day, you also need to figure out a way to work along with the team, get it done through others. So he starts putting a lot of different perspectives around how do you get stuff done as a team. And the quote he used to have says that, instead of doing things, you should actually figure out getting things done. Seems very simple, but he had a very, very amazing way of putting it into perspective. The second paper focused a lot more on, while the paper was called Leadership, Influence and Power, it actually focused a lot more on understanding power in organizations and power between interpersonal relationships and everything. And essentially all it translated to, as a combined experience of having done my own entrepreneurial venture, having worked with stakeholders and having this theoretical framework, I would probably say really helped in execution. The kind of way you started looking at doing things, working with people started changing a lot. And that has really impacted in my stint during Startup Village as well. Right from identifying the kind of people who you want to hire, you hire for culture and not for competency. There are a lot of small things that I picked up and implemented along the way. And a great credit does go to that particular course and everything during the MBA. But I'd also put equal emphasis on the books that I ended up reading all along as well. And if I have to really pick out one mentor that have happened all along, it's always been books. Yes, there were people who guided me to books at various points of time, and I'm really indebted to them of helping me get to those kinds of books. But essentially, some of these books were really profound and influential in terms of changing the way you think. And 2 books I would really like to highlight is one of those books called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. One of the most profound leadership books that I've read in terms of how you start looking at things differently from being an executive to converting into a leadership position. There's another book called 4-Hour Work Week. Title is very appealing, but at the end of the day, it talks about getting stuff done in the most productive manner. And all these were various nuggets of information which really helped in execution. And I think the fact that you learn to work with people in position, people in power, and people who are in leadership positions, I think that's been one of the biggest impacts all along across the sector.
You did mention about identifying the right people to work with, right? And at Startup Village, what were the criteria that you were looking at for selecting the right teams to come in as startups?
Very one simple criteria, you need to have a interest. It's as simple as that. So we essentially never had a hiring policy. So Startup Village itself was quite a novel initiative. You wanted to find out how to really structure a PPP incubator, which nobody had done. So there was no question of actually hiring an experienced talent. And we were setting out to create 1,000 startups or anything in a short period of time. We also wanted to focus on student entrepreneurs. So we did not really have a lot of benchmarks as to where you want to hire. The one defining trait or the one defining quality that we looked again and again is your strong, keen interest to do something. And I was also a believer that if you have a real interest in doing something, you can pick up and learn things along the way. So the way you used to sort of hire for Startup Village was that anybody who was interested would be asked to come over. We had taken a couple of apartments as guest houses. So you come and, we'll offer you a stay, we'll offer you food and everything, and you get to start working with us. So you get 1 month time, and then you get back to us saying that this is something which is interesting for me. I would like to try it out. And this was the only selection metric and selection criteria. And each time when we had a new smart person who would probably want to be part of us, the way I would look at it was that now we need to grow our organization and the kind of activities that we do so that we are able to accommodate that person's growth and talent and ability as well. So it was a reverse hiring criteria. We were not looking at these 10 things we want to do and find out 10 people. I'd probably look at, okay, there's an amazing resource who's interested and keen and willing to spend their time. What do we do with that? So this was one of the key way to look at it. The statement I would probably say is, I always used to hire for culture. So you had to understand that what we do and why we are doing it. And they also had to feel that, yes, maybe I want to have a stake and a claim in that. This is interesting. And I want to be part of this particular team that is set about doing this. So always used to hire for culture. And competency, I inherently believe that people have the ability to pick it up. And if you don't, at the end of the day, it's again a cultural competency situation. We have been supportive in terms of helping people learn and figure out. And fascinatingly for us, almost all of them who started working with us were either freshers or just out of college or a few years of experience. And a proud moment for me to say that some of them who work along with me are in various leadership positions across various incubation institutions in the country as well. So it's been a good experience, but predominantly we used to hire or attract a team for their keen interest on doing something interesting.
You did mention about the way how you took people into the incubation program, and it sounds a little unstructured, but then it's so justifiable for a program which didn't have any previous models to look into.
Right.
But one of the biggest problems of that was that, could you turn back and say, see, we have invested so much time, effort and money into it, and we have produced, say, X startups out of it. Are you happy with the numbers?
Absolutely. In terms of the absolute numbers and from an incubation perspective, in terms of the impact that it created from a non-profit perspective, absolutely happy with the numbers, even from an ROI perspective. And having worked in the consulting field and the PPP domain and everything, at the end of the day, you need to justify why we are doing, what we are doing in terms of hard numbers and quantifiable numbers as well. And I have an entire way to quantify it, even from a simple metric of, if government have pumped in, let's say, 1.25 crores of money, we have had more than 3.25 crores of money that came in as contribution of the private sector. So it's more than 1:1 contribution. We have had another 2.25 crores of revenue that has been generated. We figured out a model how to run a sustainable incubator. 65 startups were incubated with us. And from a state where we said that people probably would not even respond to entrepreneurship, we had an application trending rate of 200 to 500 startups every month, or teams applying to us every month, to the point where we had to have a different model to even attack that kind of a scale. So in terms of numbers, absolutely yes. From the outside, it might seem extremely unstructured, but actually it was not really that unstructured as well. There was a philosophy and methodology how it guided. And for the way for you to understand that is actually to understand how we actually learn. Now we have this fundamental principle that we have to have a big book and you have to have 10 hours of continuous study to actually pick up a lot of information. But human brain actually starts picking up things in nuggets. So that is why a social media approach is a much more faster way for us to learn. Learning through networks and learning through connections is a much more faster way for us to learn. And if you look at this, the mentoring in Startup Village was structured around peer-to-peer mentoring. It was not structured around a structured mentoring program. And peer-to-peer mentoring happens between people who are of the same caliber doing similar stuff. If you look at the entire design of the complete program, right from the ground floor being opened, the first floor and everything, the entire design right from start to end was structured around increasing interaction with people. And this stems from a lot of research as well. There is something called as a Building 21 in Stanford, which is called one of the most, innovative buildings across the globe. And when people start looking at it, the only key thing that emanated was that the biggest factor for creativity is human-to-human interaction. So it might seem structured and chaotic, unstructured and chaotic from the outside, but what really happened was that we were maximizing, serendipitous people running into each other. Every design of the program was structured informally for a reason. Because an informal conversation helps create a bond and helps create a network. And the moment that happens, given that there is digital media today right now, my conversations start happening at any given point of time. If you look at the growth or the nature of most of the companies that came out of Startup Village, the speed at which they were moving were a lot more faster, because the moment you get stuck, you had someone quickly sitting right next door who could help you out that. So there was a fast-paced movement of information and flow, and everything was structured to facilitate that conversation. So this is a way to understand that. Where we wanted to try and figure out was that's why at some point when we started growing from, let's say, 30 applications to, let's say, 100, 200 applications a month to hitting a 500 in a month, we suddenly had a problem. How do we manage or enable this peer-to-peer at that particular scale? We used to have something called community gatherings every Saturday. It was predominant in every third Saturday of the month. It was predominantly a private gathering meant to facilitate conversation between entrepreneurs who are in-house. At some point, every Saturday we used to have 150, 200 turnout, and we didn't have the capacity to accommodate them. Now, we had something called as an open house, which happened every Saturday. We asked anybody who were interested not to sign a form, but to quickly come over and have a conversation with us. It was structured deliberately. Now, at some point, we had 100 and 200 people walking in every Saturday as well. So at some point, we had to figure out how do we do it at scale, which is where the playing around with how do we do it digitally started happening as well. So the space was an enabler, but the real value happened in the conversations.
Since you brought up mentoring, it is one of the value-added services that an incubator model provide, and a model like a Technopark cannot provide. But how difficult is it to measure the transparency, efficiency, and return of investment in such models?
So I wouldn't probably know an exact metric to put a return investment that's such a model of a mentoring scenario.
No, as an incubator.
As an incubator, okay. So yeah, primarily I can give you I can have some thoughts or reflections on that. So as a fund or someone, you are looking at putting your money in a company and looking at your returns out of that. As an incubator, and essentially as a non-profit incubator, nobody has settled that dispute in terms of what do you call, is it jobs that you want to go by, is it the kind of companies that came out of it, is it technology that came out of it. And eventually every incubator needs to start having its particular character as well. The way we ended up translating is in terms of tax dollars. I mean, the dollars that comes back into the system economy, because predominantly this was given by the government, and the returns to government, return to society happens in terms of the amount of economic activities get created. So a company will start generating revenue, end up creating an economic activity. The company which generates a job also end up creating economic activity. So eventually we started translating into what is the amount of taxes that end up getting paid. And Government of India also does that measurement. For every single dollar or single rupee invested by Government of India, what is the multiplier that was created in terms of tax paid back? And even from a direct estimate of direct taxes that were paid as a result of the companies that came out of Startup Village, we had more than a 5x return within the three-year time frame. Now all these companies will continue to grow. One such example is Profounders started as a company with a small table, 4 kids sitting around a small table. Today, as of yesterday, I was speaking to him. He is looking at taking a 50,000 square feet space in one of the IT parks in Kerala. Now this is a company which has grown from a small table to hiring more than 100 people in less than 3 to 4 years time. If you want to really look at the impact it has created, you can either get into a debate of whether they have created high quality jobs or low quality jobs, but essentially as a way to benchmark everyone, you can look at the amount of tax it ended up paying back into society. And every incubator, at least the public incubators, in my opinion, should start looking at this as a metric of measuring impact.
Excellent, because I was always confused about the revenue model for an incubator, especially a non-profit.
So revenue model, again, I can have reflections there. So let's say in Startup Village, before Startup Village, incubators used to say that, at least the ones we approach used to say that we'll give you advice, we'll give you blah, 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 and you have to give us 10% equity on day one. 10% would be pessimistic. We have instances where people used to ask 20, 30% as well. Now, when we started Startup Village, we actually ended up saying that, equity is anyways going to pay us only in the long run. Students don't have a lot of money to pay, and we need to figure out a model of making sustainable without relying on equity. And essentially, there was a lot of mistrust around giving equity also. So what happened was that we ended up telling people that we don't need equity on day one. We don't want to take your equity and keep it with us. If you believe that we're genuinely adding value, you can come back and voluntarily donate 1 to 2%. And we kept saying that the incubator is not in the business of maximizing equity. The incubator is the business of helping you grow. So we don't want more than 1 to 2% as well. Let's take a quick number. Even in terms of pessimistic estimates, if you had taken 1 to 2% in Profounders, right now, in a period of less than, let's say, 3 years, that equity would have grown into more than 1 crore of value. that equity alone. And if you look at the returns they're expecting over the next 3 years' time, that 1%, 2% equity would have grown to more than 5 crores, which is more than $1 million. The entire operating expenditure of Startup Village over the 3-year period was less than 6.5 crores. So just one company getting to a success as that of Profounders and a 1 to 2% of equity in that one company would have made an incubator sustainable.
This is pretty much in sync with the numbers. They say that if, out of 10 startups, just, 2 or 1 become successful, and that is more than enough for a VC to continue investing.
VC, yes. For the VC, absolutely yes. But what we need to miss out of the fact that, so I've often heard this quote of out of 10, 9 fail. I would really like to challenge this particular thing. See, that is a VC number. VCs, venture capitalists, are in the business of growing companies exponentially, and they, by design, they don't mind if companies fail, because they're looking for that elusive or exclusive, huge skyrocket growth. The incubator is in the business of, is more like a education institute. You're not looking at that one, candidate is going to be a topper. You're looking at being able to support every entrepreneur, and every entrepreneur has his or her own trajectory. There are companies in Startup Village who came out of Startup Village, again student entrepreneurs, who are not talked about as much as the Profounders, who have done phenomenally well, which have bootstrapped all along the way. They're insanely profitable, they're working in amazing technology, but they've not received any external validation in terms of funding and everything. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these companies have not generated IP, have not generated value. As an incubator, I consider that as much as a value, what we have been able to offer. Just that unlocking a value happens only at a point of exit. So if you look at the number of 9 companies fail out of 10, which has become a very popular adage, I think that needs to be disputed from an incubator perspective.
And talking about fundraising, how difficult it is for a Kerala startup to raise funds, considering the lack of a strong network of VCs or angel investors that we have in Kerala?
So I'll probably pick on one of the words that you used. How difficult is it for a Kerala startup to raise funds? The market doesn't care. See, at the end of the day, entrepreneurship and execution game, you're looking for the most efficient solution. The market doesn't care whether you're coming from Kerala, whether you are coming from India or everyone. Yes, you want friendly first stage investors who want to help and support you. Relation networks come into play. So we have had instances of people coming in and saying that I'll write the first 2 lakhs or 3 lakhs or whatever because I want you to give it a try. But if you start talking about professional serious investors, they're going to look at execution. Now, if your customer acquisition cost is probably, let's say, 10 rupees and someone else's, let's say, 5 rupees, you're not going to be able to attract capital. And today, we have tons of private capital available. The number of companies that get funded from India, from the angel range, which is 1 to 4 crore, is anywhere between 40 to 70 every month. And that has stayed consistent for the last 2 years. And my expectation is that it's going to stay, continue, or even increase over the next 3 to 5 years. The angel investment scenario has really gone through a very big transformation. Now, my question is, as startups or entrepreneurs from Kerala, are we going to sit here and wait till Malayali angel investors get to that particular point of time? What is stopping us from taking a bus or a train or a flight, going to Bangalore and talking to investors there? You have a bunch of them. All of them invest in startups. They are agnostic. They're working in sectors. There are tons of platforms as well. We have people who sat in Startup Village and got investments just by networking over LinkedIn, right? So the myth that it's more like saying that people should actually come to me. There's nothing stopping us from actually going out and figuring it out.
So you think there's no influence of a strong VC network being present here hypothetically would have helped us get more funds?
No, not a VC network. What would have really helped is actually having a much more benevolent seed system. So the nature of Kerala ecosystem is slightly different from a Bangalore ecosystem. If you look at the average profile of the entrepreneur that comes out of a market like a Bangalore or a Hyderabad, now these are professionals who have actually worked for some time in the industry. They are CXOs and everyone. And the moment they step out, you actually they themselves are able to fund for the first 25 to 30 lakhs. The profile is very different. But if you look at the average profile of the entrepreneurs or the entrepreneurship movement that has happened very recent times, these are mostly much more younger people who are either in college or just out of college and everything. That's been the profile, and it's sort of unique to Kerala as well. Maybe it's also because we have student entrepreneurship focus. And for this particular audience, the first 1-2 lakhs or 5 lakhs is absolutely critical for them to help navigate a term into bootstrapping stage, into a prototype and everything. This is a very unique requirement of the Kerala ecosystem. Presently, the government has announced a provision within the budget of giving 2 lakhs as a incentive for young teams. In the recent budget has been announced, 1,000 ideas will be supported for 2 lakhs, and you probably would not find a similar provision in other budgets, because that's a very unique Kerala thing. Now, what will be excellent is the private sector, the business leaders, stepping in and also saying that let me also put in the 1 to 2 lakhs, because more than the money, it's the kind of access to these networks, the access to the business knowledge that gets into the picture is going to have the biggest impact. So what I would really love to see happening is a lot more interaction with the established business community in Kerala, stepping in and helping our entrepreneurs, because these people just sitting on the boards of some of our companies will improve the corporate governance standards, will improve the relation with the system. And we have some fabulous people also from the state as well. They may not have specific experience and expertise in building product startups or the specific sector you're working in, but these people also bring in far deep networks and far deep relationships from the business industry across the whole. Nawaz Miran, for instance, he actually was the youngest president of some for South India chapter of CII. The kind of access or the kind of influence that his position brings in will be phenomenal. If he starts stepping in terms of just facilitating the conversations, not from the money. So I'll also have to point it towards entrepreneurs also. The entrepreneurs should really understand that it's not the money that these people have the most to offer. The kind of knowledge, the kind of access that we bring together is also something to go by. And this is one way to start looking at peace and system. A VC network, local grown network will automatically come at a point where you actually start seeing amazing startups coming out of Kerala.
Okay, so the amazing startups has to come first.
Yes, so every ecosystem has had that. So for India to get into a different growth league altogether, we needed a Flipkart. For US to get in the growth league, they needed a Google. Until Google, there was no question of VCs funding a company which did not even have a semblance of a revenue plan, right? So for every startup ecosystem, or every system for that matter, they need that one anchor to get into a particular growth league, which will further channelize the whole thing. Large number of investors in Silicon Valley are people who profited and exited out of Google. And if you look at that, we actually have seen the same trend in the country right now. Some of the best known angels and investors, early investors in the country, are entrepreneurs or are early employees of some of these iconic companies that happen in the country. So we are beginning to see that trend, and the moment we see that happening, we'll see a lot more interest.
Talking about anchors, do you think the story of Profoundus will have a great impact on that?
It'll be a phenomenal impact. So on two counts, we're going to see far better stories going forward. I'm absolutely convinced of that. This is more like a beginning of good things to come. On 2 counts, this is phenomenally impactful. 1 count is the fact that, see, as an entrepreneur, you need to understand that if you need to raise investments and everything, at some point you also need to understand exits. You need to be able to give your investors, your employees, your stakeholders an exit from a financial perspective. And Profound is probably the first company got to that point in terms of the term exit being even spoken about in the system. And that will become a very interesting point for us to start understanding, appreciating and talking about that. So on that 1 count, absolutely yes. And there have been a bunch of founders who've been phenomenally focused on the metrics. They're not dazed by the intelligence of the idea. Yes, they are committed founders and everything, but they also understand business execution. That's one impact. The second impact, see, one of the challenges that the technology industry is facing is that people struggle to translate into what you're building. So if you understand or if you're trying to explain what Profoundus is doing, they're an algorithm company, they're a data play company. It's not something a layman can probably look and feel and touch and understand what you're doing. And in Profoundus case, we're going to see a very visible impact in terms of the fact that they're going to add a lot more people to their team. And all these 4 founders were extremely respected and known in their respective communities. And everyone has seen their story, right from the day when they were a 4-person team across a table. And today when they're going to grow to, let's say, 100, 200, 500 people, they have made a brilliant commitment and choice to stay back in Kerala, which is phenomenally commendable of them. That visual impact of seeing this company grow over a period of 3 to 5 years is going to really calm a lot of nerves and give us a belief that these kinds of things are possible by youngsters from our community. On these 2 aspects, it's going to be a good turning point. But in my understanding, the good things are only yet to come. This is just the start of that.
So on one hand, we have companies like Profoundus, and on the other, we have companies like FinTech, which was your poster child of Startup Village. Right. Took off very well, did raise a lot of funds. They in fact came up with their product too. In fact, I bought their product because it was from a Kerala startup. I bought the product, and then we see that they are moving on to other things. So why does this happen? What are the lessons to be learned from such stories and narratives? Because you said narratives do have a huge impact.
Absolutely.
And this is also another narrative from Kerala.
Yes.
And we were all very hopeful about it. So what are the lessons to be learned from it? And actually what happened?
Sure. So I'm probably not able to go through absolute specifics of the particular story because it's not on the public yet. But see, from a narrative perspective, it was what are the takeaways from the whole story? See, until that point of time, nobody even said that hardware was possible from India or from Kerala for that matter. And suddenly you had a trailblazer as a poster child, and it came out of nowhere. It caught us also by surprise. To their credit, they were audacious, they went ahead and chased it, they actually came out with the product, which itself was a story in itself. Now, unfortunately, it didn't translate to the next line of action. And part of the reason is, in my understanding, at some point you have to translate into absolute. So, building a company or doing a startup is not just chasing a fancy, interesting idea or a product. Yes, you started out as that. And some point you translate into a very execution-oriented, focused organization. You build your governance practices, you build your board, you build your advice and everything. And that is the kind of growth trajectory that you also take to transition from a maverick team to a big organization. So all these factors did play a role, and part of the fact that it's also hardware play, it's a tougher market, you need larger capital and everything. So it's a combination of that. Now, two takeaways. People said it's not possible. It is possible. Biggest takeaway. It was a poster child. We would have loved to see a lot more coming out of it. It's a trailblazer, and a lot more hardware startups have been enthused and chasing that particular journey. And the biggest learning or lesson, or probably the takeaway for every founder, is that along with your journey, you actually need to start moving from being a founder to a CEO. You are a maverick entrepreneur, a dynamic person who does everything. And then you transition along with the growth journey of organization into becoming a person who expresses leadership, who defines a company and starts building a team and taking that kind of calls and everything. So the way to translate it is you also need to navigate from being a founder to a CEO. And for that to happen, you also need a lot of coaching systems and everything, which is where the existing business leaders can also come and step in. So these are some of the key takeaways, but yes, that's where I will have to leave it right now.
All right. So you have worked with so many startups. From individuals like Finn and groups, teams, fresh college graduates, people with experience. And what do you think is the best formula for surviving and, most importantly, growing your startup? And what are the mistakes that you should never make?
Okay, mistakes you should never make. Probably don't raise a lot of money initially. So this is something which I read somewhere. You raise money initially, you'll make a lot more expensive mistakes. The single biggest takeaway, if you flip it around, is be diligently focused on bootstrapping and execution. See, today, one of the conversations I'll have to probably get into first with almost every entrepreneur is, where do I get the money? Now, good thing is there's a lot of capital available in the market. Now, the reality is that the world has changed a lot more in such a way that it's possible to achieve a lot more without actually putting hard cash. Your intellectual ability and your servers and all combined, you can do a lot more execution. So be diligently focused on bootstrapping during the initial days. Keep your costs absolutely low would be one key takeaway. That's a positive way to look at it. The second biggest takeaway, in my opinion, is be diligently focused on customer. There's only one thing that you can save you in the long run. It's customers vouching and backing for you. See, at any given point of time, I can bounce an idea and say that, hey, I don't think that's going to work. And that's a subjective opinion. There are no experts in my understanding. And we had this philosophy in Startup Village right from day one that we don't judge ideas. We don't have no clue which idea is going to succeed or what. We can probably give some feedback, we can give some insights, we can connect you to someone who can give you better perspectives and insights. But at the end of the day, there's only one validation, which is execution. The moment you have a customer, that is the way in which you say that, yes, there is a need. Be diligently focused on a customer. Maybe it's time to delete the word marketing from your dictionary. The moment you think of marketing, you start looking at a push way of putting your product and service out there. You start with one customer. There's a phenomenally brilliant article written by this gentleman called Paul Graham, which says, do things that don't scale. And the essential message of that particular entire essay is saying that be diligently focused on your one customer. Delight your one customer. That customer will bring you the second through word of mouth. The second will bring one each, and it's a geometric progression. The world has changed from advertising marketing to word of mouth. And for that to happen, you need to actually move from 1 to 2 and 2 to 4. And for that to happen, the first customer should be insanely happy. Be diligently focused on your customer would be my one way to wrap it up.
So you're also working with Killer Startup Mission as a consultant now, and you're involved with a lot of initiatives such as the fellowship program, which I believe is your brainchild. And I'm pretty impressed with how you have brought in a lot of young talents and getting them to do things otherwise government would not have actively got into. So what are the kind of initiatives that you do under the fellowship program, and also what are the other initiatives that you're involved with in the Kerala Startup Mission?
So Kerala Startup Mission is one, and generally I'm still involved in a lot of initiatives, which is one of which is I'm actually penning a column for Madhurumi as well. So essentially there are only two ways to look at the way I go about various activities right now. So I converged on two keywords. One is the fact that you need to open source knowledge. Right, and that is something which I am committed to. There was a lot of learning all along in doing Startup Village, not predominantly because I figured out a lot of knowledge. It's all the knowledge that I picked up along the way from the Rohils and the Arjuns along the side. So I had access to the front seat access to a lot of these happenings, and there's tons of learnings out there, and I'm committed to actually getting it out, open source knowledge. And that's part of the reason why I made a commitment to writing. I'm not a natural writer. I'm trying to put a lot of thoughts there, because that is also the way in which I can get this message out to a lot more youngsters and students and kids as well. Two, I made a commitment to sort of start writing in regional language. Yes, we as a society understand English, but if you really start looking at it on a more deeper level, our comprehension is still in our native language. For us to understand the deeper concepts well, we need to understand in the local language. We need to understand in local references. ICU is a case in point. Some of the comments in ICU, the International Cell Union, that particular website, a lot of it talks about Malayalam movie memes. And some of those memes actually talk a lot more than a big narrative. So there are a lot of ways in which we understand comprehension. That's all the reason why I made a commitment to figuring out local language. So this is one part of the story, getting the message out to a lot more people that it's possible, these are the opportunities, these are the avenues. The second keyword is an essential leadership. So at some point, so one of the understated facts about Startup Village, so everyone focused on the number of companies that came out of it. Now, there's another side to the story. Almost every incubator, when we started a Startup Village incubator, my entire budget for hiring a team was less than 10 lakhs, right? That is the entire team budget. You hardly can't hire anyone. And if you're in the knowledge industry, you need to hire good quality talent. And good quality talent, yes, we don't need to probably pay them extraordinary, above market salaries, but you still need to do that. Our team grew to a team of 15 people, and every time we had a key initiative, we had a key person leading that particular initiative. And this particular team was a real reason why we could attempt or pursue a lot more things. So at some point, you can have 20 incubators in the state, but you also need 20 incubation leaders or managers, people who understand it, people who drive the system. You can't just have education institutions as infrastructure. You also need the best teachers, the best administrators. Similarly, I realized that there is a lot of need for these kinds of community leaders. From the incubation, initiate the startup community perspective. And if you really look at, there's a lot of silent work a lot of communities do. The GDGs, the informal networks and everything. So we had to figure out a way to enable these kinds of individual champions to do what they do best. Two, we also needed to figure out a way to grow them into leaders of their respective states as well. So these are the two keywords I'm working towards, and this fellowship is also aligned to that in terms of creating a leadership pipeline, leadership talent. And I realized there's a huge dearth as well. Just today, I received another email from one of my networks saying that an incubator in Bombay is looking for a CEO. Now, from a state where we had less than 10 private incubators, today we have more than 30 to 40 private incubators in the country. All of them need CEOs, all of them need incubation managers, all of them need community managers, and the entire gamut to actually power that particular system. There is a huge dearth for people, the leadership talent. We need entrepreneurial leaders to become founders. We also need talent to run these kinds of things as well. So the keyword that kept on coming back again and again is talent. Your ability to attract good quality talent, your ability to provide them an amazing environment for them to flourish and grow, your ability to groom them and nurture them to become, realize their own potential is what creates an innovation ecosystem. In some level, we are only facilitators, and our job is to keep stepping out of the way so that they can go on to do amazing things and we can learn from them. And this is a way to start looking at it. It's always about talent. Any incubation ecosystem is about talent. Ease of doing business is in some way the simplest way to translate is how much do you stifle talent? The more you stifle talent, talent starts deciding to move to pastures where they are appreciated and respected. Hackers, if you really understand the ethos, they are people who want to have creative expression. They are hacking because they want to express and show their talent as well. We had an instance of someone who actually hacked to one of our Startup Village websites. We got him to eventually turn into an incubator for a company. Because he's a phenomenal talent. He's actually figured out a way to hack into the system, and with all due respect, we should figure out a way to get him interact and be a part of our system. That is my best insurance also, to ensure that I'm not hacked the second time around. So we need to understand the ethos of how these people work and how these people think, and attracting smart talent, learning the language is key. If you look at it, beanbags don't create incubation ecosystems. But what beanbag communicated was that we understand what excites you. We understand what's in it for you. We need to listen to you and figure out what is that we can do. And that is how we need to start figuring it out. It's slightly different, it's slightly difficult, it's turning around, flipping it around the side. But any innovation, particularly high-tech innovation ecosystem, is only about talent.
And finally, you're one of the very few people in the Kerala startup scene I've seen who's very aware about the gender issues and is actively working on addressing the issue, like promoting Qualcomm scholarship program, be it paneling in discussions about the issue, where you're well read about the latest things that's happening in gender disparity in tech scene. So what do you think from your experience is the best intervention to ensure gender equality, especially in the startup scene and also generally broadly in the tech scene?
Sounds good. So my interest in the particular scenario did not happen out of a standalone thing. When I started looking at numbers, a lot of people started asking, how many entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs you had in Startup Village, and it was just an interesting problem to try and address. What is happening there? And that's just a general nature of me being interested in problems and trying to figure it out, understand it better. That has led to me to a lot of learnings and a lot of listening and a lot of reading up about the whole thing. Now, I would translate it into only one key intervention, and that's the same across gender, that's gender agnostic. We did the same intervention all along in Startup Village for getting a lot of students and everything. It's relatable success stories. Now, all along, we have been talking about the Steve Jobs or the Microsoft Bill Gates and everything. Yes, good to hear, might give excitement, it might be a fist-pumping moment, I'm going to do something. But the real sense of belief that I can probably step out and do something starts happening when you see someone in your peer network who has gone ahead and accomplished that. That gives a very deep confidence that maybe I can also do that. And the second part, most important of relatable success stories, the unsaid part, or the hidden, biggest success factor. See, knowledge, mentoring or everything is very situational. Now, how do you convince your parent is very different from how you convince your American parent or how you convince your Indian parent. Peer-to-peer learning, peer-to-peer mentoring happens through relatable success stories and relatable examples. And all these ways of association plays a key. I see one woman being successful in US. Yes, that's a good starting point. I at least see a woman being successful. I see someone become successful in India, more relatable. I see someone who's a homegrown story, more successful. Someone from my class, a lot more successful. And when I started looking at the numbers, I realized that we really need to have, and that's what we in Startup Village also, we started augmenting. Anybody who's done any good stuff anywhere, we start reaching out to them and say that why don't you start talking to everyone else? And at some point, if you don't have that, we need to start figuring out what is required. The Qualcomm intervention that you rightly said right now, we did a small intervention, hardly anything to be honest. We realized such an opportunity exists and ensure that the opportunity gets to people. Very simple intervention. Second intervention, we are in a system where we have been trained to do well in quantitative academic examinations, and we are phenomenal at that. But suddenly this application form looks very different, right? It is an SOP, you have to have an essay format. And as someone who's not been exposed to that, I feel challenged. The only intervention that we did, was we started sending in an email every day, just by taking links from the internet and sending them saying that this is probably one of the ways in which you can approach it. And that ended up resulting into a scenario where out of the 120 applications that came out of the country, 100 plus applications came from Kerala. Out of the 18 scholarships, 16 came from students in Kerala. So essentially, all we needed to do was provide that access to information. And the moment you actually, so when we first told a lot of people that such a scholarship program exists, they didn't even probably believe us, because $5,000 was a lot. So belief sets in from relatable success stories. The more we have that in our system as an intervention, yes, and all of us need to work towards getting that first few success stories, because it's only them who can inspire and educate and also provide the knowledge for the other people to step in. In terms of access, other intervention, you need infrastructure intervention. So at the end of the day, if you need to get plugged in digital economy, you need a laptop, an internet connection, and a freedom and flexibility to use it. So these interventions again are gender agnostic. If I look at the numbers of where the applications came from, we realize that those colleges which had a very open internet policy, we actually got a lot of applications from there. Those colleges we had a very restrictive policy, even using laptops, you hardly did not see any applications. Those students who did not have access to laptops could not work on the SOPs on a constant basis. So there are infrastructural gaps, and that's again gender agnostic. Two interventions, you need to provide them infrastructure access. Two, people need relatable success stories. I can't go back and tell people that, hey, it's possible for you to go ahead and become a successful women entrepreneur. That you need to hear from a successful women entrepreneur. Again, our job is step out of the way. We facilitators either find people who are successful or support people to the point where we get that first one success. It's not a linear curve, it's a geometric curve. The first one might take 3 years, 5 years, but then that's going to start spurring a new set of huge people to start coming into picture.
Thank you, Sijo. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Asha.
Thank you. ഇത് തന്നെയായിരുന്നു റോബിനും എൻ്റെ അടുത്ത്